Kim Bailey, and this is Floral Art Review, where we have our AI, Design Eye, look at a competition piece of mine from previous years and give us an analysis based on the principles and elements of design, which is how we are judged in competitions, and some suggestions for improvement of the design. This week we're looking at a design that was titled Weathered and Rustic, and the space allowed was 70 centimetres, height unlimited, and as you can see, what I've done is used a rustic basket as the container, and I've used mostly dried materials in it as the weathered part of my interpretation. So it's got some seed pods, it's got some dried banksias, and it's got some dried fern, but it's also got, the interesting part for me was that I utilised some grape stems, I guess is the best way to describe it. So where the grapes are, with the grapes taken off, and I've left them to dry because I just thought they were interesting shapes when I bought the grapes themselves, and I thought, well, let them dry, I'll use them in something. And then I've actually got some fresh grapes in the centre of the design itself, in the basket itself. I was really quite happy with the design when I put it together. It came together exactly the way that I had hoped it would, and I thought it was a really good interpretation of the title, the class title, Weathered and Rustic. And I think at that stage I thought perhaps it lacked a little bit of height, but other than that I was very happy with the design. It didn't get a place in the competition, and I was disappointed at the time because I thought it was a good interpretation. I asked for some judges' feedback after the design because it was an internal competition where I could do that, and the only feedback I got really was that it didn't use the space well enough. And I thought, okay, that's not really telling me anything about the design composition itself. And so I'm interested to see, in terms of the principles and elements of design, what the analysis can tell me today, as well as some of the suggestions that might improve the design. Having looked at it while I've been putting the video together, in terms of the image, I do think that it is a little bit too dense, and it's a little bit too contained by the basket itself. I haven't really utilised the space in the sense that that design itself is probably about 50 centimetres across, so I've still got a lot of room either side that I could use, but I've also got some height that it should have had in it as well. Should have brought it at the end. The ratio is that 3:5:8, that golden ratio that we like to have, is not quite there. So there are things that I would do with it now, even though I wouldn't probably change the plant material itself. But it's one of the reasons that we have this service available, is that often, even when you do get feedback at a competition, it's not enough for you to be able to work out what you should do with your design. So, as I'll talk about at the end of the video today, you can upload your own images of designs and have them analysed so that you get a better sense of what practical tips you can take away to actually do something with the design to make it fit the principles and elements of design a little bit better. So let's get on to the analysis and see what we can do, where it meets the criteria, where it doesn't, and what I could do to improve the design. Looking at line, first of all, the design relies on gentle organic curves, largely created by the woven basket structure and the arcing dried stems. These soft looping lines contribute to a relaxed and natural feel. There is no dominant directional thrust. Instead, the lines guide the eye in a circular motion around the arrangement. And that's because of the basket, and the design, as I said, is somewhat contained within the basket, or within that basket framework. So we're continually looking around that circle. We're not moving in a broader sense. So the line could probably be emphasised a little bit more or improved a little bit more, but we won't jump ahead of the analysis. We'll see what else there is in terms of our feedback to have a look at those principles and elements. We look at form now. A compact rounded form is established by the contained nature of the basket, the massing of material. So that's putting everything together very closely. The integrated surface of pods, seed heads, dried leaves and berries, which are the grapes, reinforce the rustic aesthetic. The form is unified but retains interesting irregularities that enhance its natural character. So we've got some unification in terms of the design, but there's enough interest within the different forms. So particularly I think the grape stems, that it creates an interesting arrangement. It's not a flat arrangement in that sense. So space, the design is fairly full and dense with very little negative space inside the arrangement. Now, if you've looked at any of the other videos, I've talked a lot about space and about having negative space that enhances the design, forms part of the design. So that's lacking in this one. The closed construction makes the viewer focus on surface texture rather than internal depth. A few outward-reaching elements, the ferny foliage and twiggy stems, provide slight spatial extension, but the design overall reads as one cohesive mass. And that, I think, is a flaw in the design. The more I look at it, the more I think that it's just this one very dense collection of plant material, and there's nowhere for you to rest. There's nowhere for you to feel like there's some space, some negative space, some enhancement of the individual elements. It's all just massed together as one big clump, as it says. Texture. Texture is the star of this design. So even back then, this is some considerable time ago I did this design, that texture was something that I really focused on in terms of my designs. Rough pods, bristly seed heads, wrinkled berries, brittle twigs, matte basket fibres, and soft grey foliage all contribute to an exceptionally tactile experience. The layers of contrasting textures keep the viewer visually engaged and reinforce the weathered theme. So all of that is a good interpretation of the title, and it's certainly the hero of the design. The dilemma, again, is about the space and about massing it all so closely together that you get focused on the textural changes, but there's no rest in between them. There's no way for you to say, okay, this is a really nice, smooth section of the design. This is a brittle section. This is a wrinkled section. And the basket almost gets lost in terms of the overall design because of that massing of the elements, the components that are within the design. So colour. The palette is beautifully subdued and earthy. Russets, browns, muted greens, aged golds, and the deep charcoal blue of the berries. This restrained palette evokes natural ageing and autumnal calm. The berries add the only strong value contrast, adding as a subtle visual anchor. So that's the darkness of the what it's called berries, which are the grapes. That's providing us with a focal area, a place that is different to the surrounding area. Once again, I think it would have been enhanced by having some space around it. So not having so much plant material pushed up against it so that it became an area that you were drawn to rather than was popping out in your face, shall we say. Balance. The design leans toward asymmetrical balance. Most weight sits centrally and slightly to the left, counteracted by the extended elements on the right. The overall impression is stable and harmonious. And that's true. You know, it does look like a balanced design. It doesn't look like anything's out of place. But it would, again, be enhanced by some space around it, by some space within it, without losing the balance of the design itself. Dominance focal area. Dominance is created primarily through texture rather than a single focal flower. The darker berry cluster is the closest to a focal point, adding depth and visual rest among the lighter surfaces. So once again, as we've been establishing all the way through, it needs some space in the design, and that the dominance or the focal area is almost lost because there's so much pushed together in one single mass in the design. Contrast. Contrast is achieved through rough versus smooth surfaces, dark berries versus paler sun-bleached materials, compact areas versus airy twigs. This contrast enriches the rustic narrative. So even in the areas where I've got those grape stems it's a little bit airy, we're starting to see how much the negative space or space between the plant materials is going to enhance the design and still give you the rustic feel, but focus and highlight those areas that are a little bit different texturally or colour-wise. Rhythm and movement. The woven basket lines naturally move the eye in a circular flow. Repeated curved elements create gentle rhythm, encouraging exploration of all sides. So it's a good combination of plant material in terms of its placement that keeps you moving in that circular pattern and gives it rhythm and gives it movement. The repetition gives it rhythm, and the shape of the plant material I've put in there gives it movement. Proportion. Material size and the scale of the container work well together. The pods and textures feel proportionate to the basket opening and do not overwhelm its structure. I think they do a little bit. I would like to see, and perhaps once again it's going to come back to a little bit more height and a little bit more negative space within the design, because I think the scale of the plant materials I've used is right, but I do think that the placement of them somewhat overwhelms the basket itself. Now that I look at it dispassionately after a few more years. Scale. The design maintains an intimate medium scale appropriate for a tabletop or exhibition staging. So the scale is right. In the assessment of the design, the analysis of the design, I didn't actually tell it what the spacing was because I hadn't measured the design itself, so I didn't know in relative terms how much of the space I had used. I knew in the back of my mind that had been the criticism from the judges at the time, that it didn't use the space well enough. So in terms of the immediate analysis of this image, what the AI is telling me is that it looks like it's in scale, which is a good thing to know as well. Because sometimes you can be out of scale even if you've used the actual space the right way, because your container's too big or your container's too small, and so the relative scale of your plant material to your container or to the area that you've got to use is not in alignment. Harmony and unity. Harmony is excellent. Everything belongs within the weathered natural earth toned theme. Unity is achieved through consistent material choices, repeated textures, and a cohesive organic form. So harmony and unity and the dominance and focal area and the balance of the design all work together so that you get a design that looks right, it looks okay when you look at it. So I get that it is harmonious and it is a unified design, but it's not, for me, it's not unbalanced. It's just not quite right. I guess I don't quite know how to express it in terms of the principles and elements of design, other than I would like to see very much now some more space, some more negative space within the design. So let's move on and see what these suggestions actually are from our AI for improving the design. So first of all, introduce a small amount of open space. Amazing. Slight pullback of one or two dense material clusters would give the eye more resting points and add depth. So one of the things that we talk about often is getting depth in your designs. This is probably a little bit easier when you're on the bench rather than on a framework that you've got to do a design for. But this design had depth because of the basket itself, so it was going to give me depth. But because it's a circular basket, the trap is those ratios, so the 3-5-8 ratio that we like to see in terms of width, depth and height. Because you're working on a circle, it's going to be the depth and the width are going to be the same because it's the diameter of the circle. So the height is something, so you've got to work with it, making it wider, which I have done by having the overhang outside of the design, but I haven't got the height right. Definitely haven't got the height right. And so that needed to be addressed in some way and still keep the balance, because if you look at it, if I got too much height or I went out too far to one side to change those ratios, it's going to start to look unbalanced unless I've got that space within the design that incorporates itself into the design. And so it just makes it a broader design overall. So most definitely that's something that I'll need to do. And it's probably as simple as lifting up the grapes or bringing down the grapes a little bit, having more of the grape stem material up higher in the design, so from the top of the handle of the basket, or having some of the dried banksias up higher in the design as well, coming up taller in the design is what I mean to say. Strengthen the focal area. You might emphasise the berry cluster with a subtle frame of lighter material or reposition it closer to the golden ratio point. So this is where it's talking about that golden ratio is the 358. So where we want the centre of those dimensions to meet. It's not quite there. It needs to be just a little bit lower down in terms of the height that is there in that design at the moment. So if we had more height, it probably wouldn't need to move as much. But that's definitely, once again, something that I would look at to make sure that I had the space, that I had a focal area that was most definitely the focal area, not just this massive, very dense material all pushed together. Refine the silhouette. A more deliberate extension of one or two lines could give the outline even more character and prevent the form from feeling overly contained. So it's all coming back to this same idea of it being this dense, massive material rather than something that extends itself out and gives you time to move through the design and think about the different textures and think about the different levels of depth and overlay and height in the design. So adding that negative space is going to change so much more of the design dynamic that that's the thing that I would focus on first if I was improving this design. Consider height variation. A touch more vertical lift from one element could create hierarchy and add movement without disrupting the rustic feel. So again, as we've talked about all along, this is something that it needs most desperately, and perhaps when I think about the comment from the judges at the time, that's what they meant. I was not experienced enough at the time to ask them to clarify. You know, it was enough that I would dare to ask a judge, could they give me some feedback on the design? And they in turn, I think, struggled to think of how they could express it in terms that would make it easy for me to understand what they were saying. It's about communication, and that's why in this instance, when we say you can upload an image of yours, just go to the website, follow the instructions there. It's going to give you these written instructions, these written ideas, and you can think about them and you can email back to us and say, I don't understand what it's saying in this, I don't understand what it's saying in that. But what we do when we put your design through our AI analysis, human judges look at the result as well. And so if we feel that there needs to be some explaining of what it's suggested, then we will put that in as well, so that you know you're going to get a comprehensive review of your design and some very practical ways that you can think about in terms of that design and try it if you want to. And it helps you in your education and your floral art journey. Now, I've been doing this for 20 years and I don't know it all. I don't think I ever will know it all. So I embrace the opportunity to learn and to grow and to practice my skills so that I get the enjoyment out of putting the designs together. I know that when I've interpreted a class title, that my creativity, my expertise, my learning up to this point goes into putting it together, but there's always more that I can learn. And I have found this an invaluable resource for me, and that's why I enjoy sharing it with you. I will leave you to think about your own designs. This week we looked at Weathered and Rustic. I look forward to talking to you again about another design very soon. I'm Kim Bailey and this is Floral Art Review.